Hey guys! In today's list, I'll cover the 10 best fan-translated JRPGs I've ever played. But I won't be including the ones that nowadays have an official English localization, like the Trails series for example. Only ones that are still exclusive to Japan. So let's begin! Number 10. Tales of Innocence. Both versions of this game, original DS one and its remake on the PS Vita, are fully fan-translated. The one I played is the Nintendo DS version, many years ago. Now, I'm not here to judge the translations cause I don't know Japanese. They might be quite faithful to the original scripts or the exact opposite. From what little I understand, they're all legit. Besides, I'm here to tell you how awesome these games are, whether the grammar or spelling makes sense or not. This one never left Japan because, according to Hideo Baba, the series producer, there was poor marketing feedback from Western territories. Huh, okay. The remake was also left in Japan for similar reasons. I'm not sure I believe Baba, to be honest, but anyway, the plot is really weird here. Protagonists are basically the reincarnations of some gods that fought in a war, so now that there's a new war going on, they will join forces to fight together as humans without knowing their reincarnations. Well, it's a Tales game, so it goes on from there to other things, you know how it is. Gameplay is traditional, town to town, with overworld, ruins, dungeons, forests, etc. The battle system stands out a lot here, thanks to being similar to the one in Tales of the Abyss. You've got full control of your characters, and the controls are quite intuitive and responsive. In the DS version though, you can only have 3 during battle, 4 in the PS Vita remake. Also, the DS original is very challenging, one of the hardest Tales I've ever played. I don't know if the PS Vita version was rebalanced, but it looks to be the best version of this game to play. Number 9. Tear Ring Saga. When Shoso Kaga, the creator of the Fire Emblem series, left Nintendo, he made his own studio and released a spiritual successor called Emblem Saga. Because of the name and the similarities in gameplay, Nintendo sued him. Eventually the gameplay was left intact, but the name had to be changed. The result was Tear Ring Saga, released exclusively on the PS1 in 2001, late in the console's lifespan, so obviously because of this and the lack of support from publishers, it stayed in Japan. The story follows 2 princes that are forced to start a small uprising to save their kingdom and fight the oppressive empire. Classic Fire Emblem plot. And naturally, the gameplay is identical. Units move on grids, there's a weapon triangle system, permadeath, and a variety of mission objectives. At some point, the parties will be divided into 2 groups, each with their own maps and missions. Something that gives the game a break from its repetitive nature. However, what stands out the most here is the difficulty. I swear it's damn near close to that of the infamous Fire Emblem Thracia 776, with ridiculous spikes, overpowered enemies, and infinite reinforcements in some maps. This is one of the hardest video games I've played in my life, and I still don't understand how I beat it. But since story, characters, and combat are incredibly well developed, I just couldn't give it up. It's a great game. A sequel was released on PS2, which is also fan-translated, but I haven't played it. The ROM just doesn't work on my PlayStation 2, sadly. Number 8. Fire Emblem The Binding Blade. Most Fire Emblem games have been localized except 4. 2 on the Super Nintendo, 1 on the Nintendo DS, and this one on the Game Boy Advance. However, they're all perfectly fan-translated. But I'll only cover 2 of them to avoid the list from being overwhelmed by Fire Emblem games. The Binding Blade is the direct sequel to the Blazing Blade, which we did get, even though it was developed and released before. It's confusing, I know, but anyway, you play as Roy now, Eliwood's son, in a quest to stop the little prince we saved in a certain mission from the Blazing Sword. Ironic, isn't it? Little bastard turned out to be evil after growing up. Gameplay is just as addicting as the one seen in its successor, but a bit less refined. There are a few missions here that are straight up brutal, with cursed RNG and a huge lack of balance. but it's Fire Emblem, so it's always up to your strategies, character growth, and good luck to make the game easier or harder. Graphics, music, and combat are as fantastic as ever, and I think the map design, including the mission design, is a bit more clever and creative than other titles, but it's also what makes it so unforgiving sometimes. I also want to point out that the story may seem a bit bland at times, but I couldn't tell you if it's due to the translation or a boring Japanese script. Whatever the case though, this game is highly recommended. Number 7. Suikoden Woven Web of the Centuries. Known as the last Suikoden game ever developed, it never left Japan because by then the series was considered as a failure in Western sales. Suikoden 5 and Tierkreis, its predecessors, didn't sell well overseas. This PSP exclusive though was also a spin-off and not a mainline entry. It's got a very interesting plot tied to the core gameplay mechanic though. War is about to break out, but the protagonists notice something strange behind it. Soon they find out, thanks to a time traveler, that the enemy is trying to revive some ancient evil, so they learn the ability to go back in time as well in order to prevent that. So you'll also be going back and forth between two timelines and also will be recruiting the 108 Stars of Destiny this way. But the ones from the past cannot join you in the present, so instead they'll inherit their abilities to a character from the present, and that's basically how you recruit them. It's a really interesting mechanic, but of course you'll need a guide to recruit every single character in this game. No war battles or duels exist here, sadly, only it's turn-based combat with 6 playable allies in different formations. It's a good combat and the ability system connected to the Stars of Destiny is pretty well executed, since these abilities can technically level up the more you use them. Runes, however, are absent from this game, which is sad. They're replaced by a magic system that lets you craft a limited amount of spell ammo, for so to speak, for the magic users. You'll get used to it. The music is great and the graphics are good looking despite the camera being by far the worst aspect of the game. Still, I tolerated this and enjoy the heck out of this great game regardless. So if I put up with that, I'm sure most of you will too. Number 6. Bahamut Lagoon. This game didn't come out of Japan because there was barely any interest, if any at all, in strategy RPGs back then, so Squaresoft didn't see the point in localizing it. Not even its virtual console releases on Wii and Wii U made it. Well, fortunately 2 fan translations exist for the original. Many will claim the second one is better, but nah, I'm a big fan of the first one, which is the one I truly recommend. Believe it or not, this was going to be Final Fantasy Tactics until its developers decided it should be its own thing. It's called Bahamut Lagoon because there was a brutal war between the dragons over floating islands that serve as a setting for this world. An invading empire, not necessarily evil, has taken over them, so the protagonists start a liberation campaign. Despite its grid-based mechanics, you will still go around towns to talk to people or buy stuff, apart from having your own base of operations, which is an airship. Missions will be played in well-thought-out maps where you'll control small platoons, each with their own commander and dragon. Every commander can utilize a few ranged skills, be it for healing or attacking, but once they enter combat, this screen will show up, leading to a classic turn-based battle where you'll select the commands of every party member. I love the graphics in this game, but they stand out much more in these battle screens, way ahead of its time. However, you cannot control the dragons. They will act on their own every turn, attacking or drawing attention to them. It's really helpful, but also a double-edged sword. You can only alter their behavior a bit with 3 commands to keep them close or let them go all out. You can also feed them with whatever, including weapons, believe it or not, to increase their stats or to make them a bit more obedient to you. What an interesting game. I can't believe such a great and unique strategy RPG never left Japan. Number 5. Namco Cross Capcom. This is a massive crossover strategy RPG that features characters from both companies from different genres. It never left Japan probably because it had too many characters from games that also never left Japan. It's also extremely long, with a main story campaign lasting for at least 70 hours. Its success led to the creation of two spiritual successors that we did get, known as Project Cross Zone 1 and 2. Anyway, you play as Reiji and Xiaomu, two agents of the Shinra organization in charge of dealing with, well, strange sci-fi phenomena. One such phenomena is the fact that something or someone is transporting characters from different worlds to their own. Those characters go from the ones in Saga and Street Fighter, all the way to Soul Calibur and freaking Klonoa! So that's basically the appeal of this game. Grid-based combat and characters galore that a lot of us are very acquainted with. However, this isn't your average tactics game. Most characters are paired up and they move on grids, but every battle leads to this 2D screen. Here you'll control both of them by executing different combination attacks interfaced with your controller. You can use as many as you want as long as you have enough MP or action points. Special skills included. As a result, every map takes forever to complete, which is why the game's so damn long. But since it's incredibly engaging and addicting, I didn't mind. The game also features original music from the many different games involved, and their themes play every time they enter battle. Great soundtrack by Yuzo Koshiro here. This is a really good game. Number 4. Soul Trigger. Developed by defunct company Imagipuck, this is a turn-based RPG released in 2012. It wasn't localized because the PSP was dying and, well, the company itself was also dying. It follows a rebel group fighting the church for using the life energy of special people to power up technology. The story has two generational arcs, and the second protagonist's skills will vary depending on which girl you bond with the first protagonist. Great graphics and a killer soundtrack are featured here, but the gameplay isn't that traditional. You have a base of operations where you can do the usual, including selling materials to unlock new equipment, but outside of that, you'll be sent to missions with no towns to visit or overworld in between. Random encounters are there, not often thankfully, leading to turn-based battles. Up to 4 characters can fight, each with their own set of skills. Skills can be boosted with the right trigger button to do more damage if you want to, but at the cost of soul power, which is basically your MP. The game's got a great story, memorable characters, fan service, cool combat with a twist. It's very recommended. Sadly, unlike every game in today's video, this isn't 100% translated. The team gave up at some point and never finished it. Hopefully that won't stop you from playing it, as the large majority of the story is perfectly understandable. Just keep in mind, it'll freeze on chapter 7, but the solution to this can be easily found on the internet. Number 3. Fire Emblem: New Mystery of the Emblem. This is the second and last Fire Emblem I'll cover today. It's a direct sequel to Shadow Dragon on the Nintendo DS, which is a full remake of the very first Fire Emblem game ever made. Sadly, despite being localized, the remake didn't sell very well and Nintendo didn't bother with the localization of this one. So it's a remake of the Famicom sequel we never got, but the translation is really well done. Marth gets dragged into another war as a follow-up to the previous one, but a second protagonist shows up, your customizable character. Not a silent one, but with a personality a bit molded based on your initial customization. In terms of story, dialogue and characters, I found this game to be much better than its predecessor. Hell, even in terms of gameplay. But the character art style that was criticized before carried over here, as you can see. Anyway, again you'll fight in classic Fire Emblem combat with grid-based movement and weapon triangle system, so if you're familiar with the series, you should know how it works. Permadeath is included here. It's just as tough as many other retro titles in the series, but it's a bit more fun because the map design, its layouts and mission objectives were simply more creative this time around. It also includes some extra missions that are friggin' brutal, but very worth playing through. Strongly recommended this one, but it is necessary to play Shadow Dragon first. Number 2. Valkiria Chronicles 3. It's an insult that Sega didn't localize this masterpiece back in 2011. Just because the second game failed in sales overseas, Sega didn't bother bringing this over. Big mistake, as it's a much better game. Story follows the Black Ops group led by Kurt, who contributed greatly in the war seen in the first game, so its events happen at the same time as that one. I think it's the darkest in the bunch in terms of storytelling, despite having some beautiful babes to brighten the mood. In fact, there's a romance option between the two lead girls, but it doesn't alter the story one bit, just a small variation on the ending. Gameplay is identical to its predecessor, also on PSP, but with more refined missions, map design, and combat. The mission variety that was overly present in the first game comes back here to make the gameplay more engaging. It's just as difficult, but addicting at the same time. The menu-based system is back for your camp as seen in previous games, but the experience this time is awarded to the entire squad instead of a single class. And speaking of classes, most also return, as well as a couple of new ones that are unlocked later in the game. This is an incredible RPG with a great translation released since 2014. No excuse to skip it if you're a fan of the series. I'd say it's almost just as good as the first one. Number 1. Growlancer 6 Precarious World. This is a direct sequel to Heritage of War, also released on the PS2. Since the series was extremely obscure, and it still kinda is nowadays, Atlus didn't localize this final entry. Also because Heritage of War was a commercial failure despite being an excellent game. You control silent protagonist Merklich. Also amnesiac like most previous protagonists, he lives in a different continent than the one in the previous game. He works for a powerful and politically driven company known as Monopolies, in the middle of a war between two nations. Riots, terrorists, and rebel groups are happening all over the continent, but Monopoly seems to be in the middle of it all. They even want to expand to the continent of Growlancer 5, which is absolutely necessary to play first before this one, by the way. Greatly written story here, as always, by legendary writer Joe Haduki. Gameplay, graphics, combat, skill tree, and even the fairy system are identical to its predecessor. Even a lot of the music from it comes back left intact in this sequel, but there are some original themes that stand out enough to gain its own merits. Going back to the gameplay, it's traditional, so you'll visit several towns and different areas with an overworld. Enemies can be seen in groups walking around and they'll fight you if they spot you. Thankfully, the combat system from Growlancer 5 carries over, mixing real time with strategy. You can manually control your main character to kill enemies and let your allies fight by themselves, but you can also give them directions and orders. The same can be applied for every main mission out there. Most with a variety of objectives, or just one that might change after this or that event is triggered. That's what makes this series so unique, and this 6th entry didn't disappoint. Always something different you need to do in order to succeed. Incredibly addicting gameplay as before. The mixing of action with strategy still concedes a perfect result in combat. I love this game. Now, it's not as hard as Wayfarer of Time, but it's definitely much harder than its prequel. Also keep in mind that this patch seems to work perfectly fine in a computer emulator, but if you play it on your PS2 like me, it may come with several bugs and glitches. The same solution that Soul Trigger has can be applied to solve the issues here though. If you're a fan of Growlancer 5, you owe it to yourself to play this incredible follow-up. Strongly recommended! And that's it for fan translations that I've played. No, Tales of Destiny DC doesn't work on my PS2, and I haven't gotten around many others that I'm sure you'll bring up. Whatever the case, there can always be a part 2 someday. Thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe and share this video with your friends. See you next time!